What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Photo Finish, Scot Radio's home for motorsports in general and NASCAR in particular. I'm your host, Ben Schneider, joined once again by Matt Cole, coming back after a week's absence. Matt, good to see you.
Good to be back.
So we have some sad news to report that broke yesterday evening, actually about 24 hours ago on the dot. David Pearson, NASCAR legend, pioneer, three-time Cup Series champion, and 105-time race winner, has passed away at the age of 83. Matt, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, the silver fox. It's not easy to see, especially yesterday on an unrelated topic. Stan Lee passing away, and you have Pearson passing away, and he was great for the sport. He was a massive figurehead for the sport. Losing him is hard to swallow. It's hard to swallow, and I don't know when the funeral or the memorial services are going to be. I don't know if you know that. I don't know if FS1 or if someone's going to cover it. But my thoughts and prayers go out to the Pearson family as they go through this tough time.
Yeah, the Pearson-Petty rivalry in the 70s was almost like a Yankees-Red Sox. It was that big, and they were obviously the two best drivers at the time. An interesting fact is that they actually finished 1-2 63 times together, with one of them coming in front of the other. And another fact about Pearson is he was not really a full-time driver ever in his career. He only ran the full season, or the majority of the full season, more than 85% of the races, 4 times in his career. And he won the championship in 3 of them. And his 105 wins came in about half the starts of Richard Petty. Pearson has about 600. Petty had not quite 1,200. Petty, of course, has 200 wins to Pearson's 105. So it makes you wonder, if Pearson had run more races, what would the stat sheet look like in that time period?
Yeah, no, you're right. Had he run more races, personally, I think he would have surpassed Petty's wins. I mean, he was trailing 95 races.
And you have to take into consideration that obviously Pearson would have more than 105, but Petty would almost certainly also have fewer than his 200.
Exactly. No, I think that he definitely could have. I think he would have surpassed Petty. That's my personal opinion. That's just from what I've looked at and done research on and talked with you about. Pearson really was that dominant of a driver. So, given the opportunity to race more often, he did have the opportunity. It was just personal choice, but I think that he would have slipped by Petty.
Yeah, so Petty actually released a statement last night saying, quote, "I've always been asked who my toughest competitor in my career was. The answer has always been David Pearson. David and I raced together throughout our careers and battled each other for wins, most of the time finishing first or second to each other. It wasn't a rivalry, but more mutual respect. David is a Hall of Fame driver who made me better. He pushed me just as much as I pushed him on the track. We both became better for it. We have always been close to the Pearson family because they were in the racing business just like us. We stayed close, and I enjoyed visits to see David when going through South Carolina. We will miss those trips. Our thoughts and prayers are with the entire Pearson family and friends."
I know. I'm looking at that right now, and I actually pulled up. There's an article here from NASCAR, and it starts off, when David Pearson wanted to win, he won. The article goes on to talk about how Pearson was the only one who regularly got the better of Petty. So, kind of going back to the question that we were talking about earlier on, that's the proof. That's kind of where I'm coming from. Earlier I just kind of said it, but I think that's a fact. I think that's very interesting. And clearly Petty's a class act for the tweet that he sent out.
Yeah. Well, while we're on the subject tonight, and we are going to have a little bit more time, Robert and Matt on the Common Collision won't be on the air tonight, so we may go a little bit over past 8 o'clock. But Matt, since we have this opportunity here, I want to ask you, how does your NASCAR greatest of all time or GOAT list look? Because for me, I usually put Petty, Earnhardt, and Johnson as my top 3 solely on the fact that they have their 7 championships. And I feel like it's kind of a similar situation to Ayrton Senna in Formula One. Of course, his career was cut short, tragically.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure he would have gone on to win a few more championships and a couple dozen more races. But the unfortunate circumstances that he didn't, so it's tough to place him because you don't really know what might have been. And I think it's the same case with David Pearson here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. I don't mean to cut you off. But I would definitely say Earnhardt Sr. would be my one. I would agree with you on that. And then I would say, based on skill, I'd say Pearson Petty, based on the success of having such a strong influence on the sport and being so recognizable and notable. Then I would put Petty ahead of Pearson. Again, as far as skill goes, it would be Earnhardt Sr., Pearson, and then Petty.
Yeah, well, another thing to take into consideration when you talk about guys like Jimmy Johnson or maybe Jeff Gordon, 4-time champion, 3rd on the all-time wins list, is that they had their careers in a time where the sport was much more built on parity, and there were a lot more guys who could go out and compete for race wins. If you look at David Pearson's results from when he was in his prime, assuming he didn't have a DNF, he was basically in the top 5 every week. And it's kind of funny for me to see fans complain about the sport today and the big three we have now with Harvick, Kyle Busch, and Martin Truex.
Yeah.
And everybody says, well, we want it to be like NASCAR was back in the good old days. And if you look back in the good old days, it was a big two. It was Petty, Pearson all the time. You didn't have a whole lot of parity there.
No, you're right. Do those fans want to go back to having, like, 2 serious competitors? I mean, that's not what they're trying to say, but at the same time, that's what they're saying.
You want to have Harvick win 15 races a year and Kyle Busch win 18 and only leave 3 for the others. I guess that's because that's basically what it was back then.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. That's a very odd comment, I think, because that doesn't match up.
Yeah.
That doesn't match up whatsoever.
Well, I will say that if Jimmy gets an 8th, I feel like because I don't know, just the fact that he won 5 in a row in the modern era, and just I don't know, just the different formats that they keep tweaking the playoffs, they keep tweaking the chase.
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible to see the dominance that he's been able to keep going, even with all the changes NASCAR's made to try to mix things up.
No, I agree with you. I think that if he does win his 8th, he'll definitely crack not just my personal top 5, but top 5 in general of racers throughout the years in motorsports. So that would be pretty cool to witness that. And I think that he has the capability to do it, like you were talking about. There's been so many regulation changes, and yet he stays so consistent.
Yeah, well, certainly our thoughts and prayers go out to the family of David Pearson, all his friends, and particularly the Wood brothers. The team that he drove for the majority of his career and won a bunch of races for. I have to say, I really hope they bring back a throwback paint scheme for Paul Menard this weekend if they have the capabilities. Like whatever scheme they have Menard's car wrapped in, I don't know. I'd like to see them do something like they did when Trevor Bayne won the 2011 Daytona 500. They had a Pearson replica scheme that they brought out, so it would be nice to see those colors again. We'll see. We'll see if that does happen, though.
Absolutely. And the Wood brothers, they put out a tweet. Unbelievably sad day today after hearing of the passing of one of the absolute greatest NASCAR drivers. We wouldn't be here today without him, and we're thinking of the entire David Pearson family tonight. So that speaks volumes. Again, he had a wonderful team that he was racing for, a team that really, really cared about his ability to race, but also who he was as a person.
All right, so let's move on now to some IndyCar news. So Fernando Alonso has finally announced with McLaren that he will be back at Indianapolis next May. He'll be doing the Indy 500 as part of his Triple Crown bid. Of course, he has wins in the Grand Prix of Monaco and now the 24 Hours of Le Mans this year. And continuing to chase that Indy 500 win. He came close in 2017, looked like he maybe had a shot, and his Honda engine let go. It wasn't the first time or the last time that happened to him. But he was running only one position behind his teammate Takuma Sato when his engine let go. Sato ended up winning the race, so he was certainly up high enough to the point where he could have made a run at the end. And I think he really came in and showed that with even the little oval experience that he had, he was a serious contender. But the interesting thing about the announcement that came out this week is that there's no mention of an Andretti partnership. And of course, Alonso's relationship with Honda isn't the greatest. You can't blame him for being upset for all the hard times they put him through in F1. But Andretti runs Honda-powered Indy cars, and it would make it kind of awkward and difficult. Obviously, Honda, based of USA, isn't the same as Honda, based all around the world. But Michael Andretti actually sent out a tweet saying that he would be involved similar to 2017, and within minutes, that tweet was deleted. So
Wow.
there's some interesting, and of course, people grab screenshots of it.
Yeah.
So not really sure what to make of that, but Matt, what do you think of Alonso coming back?
I think it's good. I think it's really awesome to have him come back. It's a good name to have back. He said that he's voiced his desire that he wants to win the Motorsports Triple Crown pretty consistently. As far as coming back and racing with McLaren, I think that's a decent decision to make.
Yeah. This could be a solo McLaren run, which would be interesting. We knew kind of going into his first run 2 years ago that he's basically driving an Andretti car. It's got McLaren on the name. McLaren are involved, but Andretti's cars are always a threat to win in Indianapolis. If there's no Andretti name or if there's no partnership attached, and if it's just a McLaren solo effort, we may have to wait and see until they get onto the track what it looks like. And another important thing to keep in mind is that Indianapolis is really still the only major race where there are no provisionals. You take the top 33 qualifiers, no matter who they are, and they race. And we saw with James Hinchcliffe getting bumped this year, it doesn't matter what your resume is, what your name is. If you don't have a fast enough time in qualifying, you're not going to race.
Yeah.
So the prospect of if McLaren do this solo and they can't get up to speed, it looks like we could possibly have close to 40 cars enter the race this year with the way partnerships and deals are being announced. There's a very real possibility that several big names could get bumped.
Yeah. Wow, I didn't even think about that. You're right. As far as if it is, just the solo with McLaren and Andretti isn't involved, I mean, what are the repercussions of that, do you think? Or do you think that would be a smart move to just partner solely with McLaren, have that be a kind of solo deal?
Well, I think it's always better for everybody to have experience to bounce off of. So I'm not sure a McLaren entry, just McLaren, would necessarily be able to get up to speed right out of the gate. Of course, people at McLaren are smart, so we'd certainly expect them, I think, to catch on eventually. Although with how they've been running in Formula One the past few years, not too sure. Then again,
that's a good point.
Yeah, but actually, speaking of Alonso, so Matt, you weren't here last week.
I was not.
The news was finally confirmed. I think we all knew it was coming. The seat swap in Bahrain on November 26th.
Yes.
With Jimmy Johnson.
Yes.
So what's your reaction to that? I assume you're excited to see what each of them can do behind the wheel of another race car.
Yeah. No, I'm really excited. I'm really, really excited, and I know you brought it to my attention in class on, I think it was last Monday. Yeah, that you had shown it to me, and I hadn't seen it before. I think it had come out just right before we met in class. It's going to be really, really interesting. I think it's going to be a great way to really see both racers' abilities, and I think that they both have the ability to race well in different cars. It's going to shake things up. It's going to be a great move business-wise, too, because you're going to have that crossover of fans. So I think it's going to be phenomenal. I think it's going to be fun to watch. I think I think other people are very interested in what's happening, and it's going to help, both areas of the sport really grow.
Yeah, and Jimmy's 43. I don't think a 45-year-old F1 driver is going to get very far.
No.
But for Alonso, there have been some talks. He wants to try all these different racing series, as many as possible. We could see Alonso maybe in a Daytona 500 car.
That would be quite a sight. Now, how old is Alonso? Is he
30? I want to say 37.
Okay.
36, 37, somewhere in that. So certainly by Kevin Harvick's in his early 40s. He's going for a championship this weekend. He's having one of the best seasons of his career. So
yeah.
You can still do NASCAR competitively in your early 40s without a doubt.
Absolutely. So he has some time where he can really start to make some power moves, and I think this is the first step in that direction.
And this is not with no disrespect to Tony Stewart, Lewis Hamilton, with their seat swap in 2011, this isn't get in the car, do a few laps, and take pictures and be done.
Yeah.
This is a comprehensive. Jimmy's going to go to McLaren's simulator, meet the engineers, figure everything out, do as many laps as he can, and Alonso's going to do the same thing in the Hendrick 48 car.
Yeah.
Jimmy's actually been saying that he's been working on strengthening his neck, because that's a lot of things a lot of first-time Formula One drivers will comment on, is that they're really surprised at the neck strain that comes from all the G-forces from taking the corners at those speeds.
That's awesome. I mean, with Jimmy, like you said, I don't know necessarily how competitive he's going to be, but it is good to know that it's not going to be like what we saw before. Like you said, do a couple laps, take pictures. This is legit. I think more specifically with Alonso, you have someone who's competitive, someone who can shake things up, and that's what I love. I love seeing new faces. I love just a nice mix-up, because you kind of see the same thing. No, I mean, not necessarily, but you like to see this. You have to like to see this. As a fan of the sport, as a fan of sports in general, this is a really interesting move, and I think it's something that is going to go down in the history books and something we'll be talking about with our children and their children.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so back to a little bit of NASCAR action from last week. So I came into the studio Tuesday night praising Kevin Harvick, talking about how great the win was for his team because it locks him into the championship 4, and he doesn't have to worry about anything at Phoenix now. He's safe. Get all the data from Phoenix and try to apply it to Homestead. Just take it easy. And then we find out the next day that that's not the case because Harvick had an illegal spoiler. His car failed R&D inspection, as did the other 2 cars that were taken there of second-place finisher Ryan Blaney and fourth-place finisher Eric Jones. So, Matt, what's your reaction to the Harvick news?
It's tough. I think in that case, now Harvick had the issue with the spoiler.
Yeah, Blaney had crushed panels in the wrong place, it looked like, and Eric Jones, I guess it was just some sort of aerodynamic package issue that wasn't right.
Yeah, it's tough, and obviously you don't want racers to cheat. You don't want anyone to cheat. But at the same time, we were talking about it earlier, how everything has to be down to the 100th of an inch or the 1,000th of an inch.
Well, there are so many questions that come out of this for me, and the first is the question that we've been asking for years now, because it's getting kind of ridiculous at this point, the amount of so-called encumbered wins that we're seeing. Of course, NASCAR took that out of their dictionary last year. They're not using that word this year, but it's basically the exact same thing. So should NASCAR start taking the win away? Why does it take 3 days for us to hear about this? Yeah. All 3 of these cars failed. All 3, but they usually take 3 back to R&D. All 3 happen to fail this week. So are these 3 just coincidental, honest mistakes? Or is it a case of blatantly cheating, and then if you had 100% fail rate at R&D, does that mean every single car in the field is illegal, and it's only the guys that are going to R&D and getting that close inspection that are being caught?
Yeah, and Harvick's crew chief came out and said that same exact thing.
Yeah, there isn't a car out there that's 100% legal these days, is what Ronnie Childers was saying.
So then that comes down to, I think in that case, if that is the case, I think it comes back to just overregulation. You don't want ridiculous things happening, but at the same time,
you don't want a spec series either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's what you look at in Formula One. A Mercedes car looks visibly different than a Williams car.
Yeah.
And the Mercedes is much more aerodynamically quick through the corners, even though the Williams has that exact same Mercedes power unit in the back of that car. So in a straight line, their speed's virtually identical.
Yeah.
If anything, the Williams will probably be a little bit quicker because there's less downforce with their lack of aerodynamics.
Yes.
But when you take it over a course of a lap with all the twists and turns, Mercedes is obviously going to be faster. But it's the regulations, and there are regulations that the teams have to stay within the boundaries of, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like you look over a NASCAR and a Hendrick Chevrolet to the naked eye looks exactly the same as a Childress Chevrolet.
And the interesting thing here, too, is that Harvick didn't get the money, he didn't get the points, but he's still jotted down in the record book as having won the race. I can't wrap my head around that. If
So you're saying that they should take the win away?
I think it's all or nothing. I think if they're going to take the points away and take the money away, they should also take the win away. Personally, in this case, I don't know how severe the infringement was, or the penalty, what was docked. I don't know how serious the altercation to the spoiler was.
There was an official that said this is basically as blatant as it gets.
If that's the conclusion that they've come to, all three have to be taken away: the money, the points, and the win.
And it's not unprecedented. The very first NASCAR strictly stock race ever, 1949, the predecessor of the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series we know today. If you were there in attendance, you'd know that Glenn Dunaway crossed the line first with a 3-lap margin of victory, won the race pretty handily.
Yeah.
And then the inspection comes along and we find his car has illegal shocks. And so if you look at the record books today, Jim Roper is the first ever NASCAR winner, and he only completed 197 of the 200 laps because the guy who won the race, Glenn Dunaway, was disqualified and relegated to last place. So if it happened in the very first race ever, why can't it happen today?
I know. Now my question is here, if you do take the win away, you can't give it to the guy in the 2 spot. You can't give it to the guy in the 4 spot.
Well, in this particular case, you can.
Okay.
So I don't recall off the top of my head who finished third.
Would he end up?
I would think. Well, Roper crossed the line second that day in 49, so I would think that you would just give it to the next legal car.
Yes.
Although that begs the question:
do you check the car?
Well, do you have to take the third place car to R&D, and then does that take 3 days in and of itself? And then we find the third place guy's illegal, and then it's 6 days later, and we're taking the 5th place car to R&D. And in 3 days, we'll know if that car is officially deemed the winner of the race. And we've already had another race at Phoenix since that race happened. So that's part of the craziness, I think, is that there are too many rules.
Yeah.
Because I do think some of these are honest mistakes, guys trying to get as close to the limit as possible, slightly going over, and then they're labeled as blatant cheaters.
Yeah. Which isn't fair. I don't think that's fair to the racer's name, to the racer's team, to the racer's sponsors. So it's a really, really interesting ordeal we're kind of looking at here. And as far as do you take the third place?
Yeah, for what it's worth, Joey Logano was third at Texas.
Okay,
but it's not like Penske. That's what kept Joey Logano out of the playoffs last year. Was he got the win at Richmond, but it was encumbered, so the win didn't count towards the playoffs. He didn't have enough points after that, and so ended up having to sit the playoffs out. Wow. But if you look at the stat sheet that night, it still says he won the race.
Yeah. I think there's too many rules. I think there needs to be a little cut back there, a little leniency with what's going on. Like you said, you want to get as close to that margin as you can, and sometimes it just sometimes you just overstep that boundary, and it's no one's it's no one's fault really. I don't think if it's something that minor, it wasn't done intentionally. Maybe in the case of Harvick, maybe that was more intentional because of, I guess, the extremity of the altercation to the spoiler. But if it's something that's really minuscule, I don't think it's done on purpose.
All right, so enough of that. We could go on and on about that. There's so much debate on what we should do with encumbered race cars these days. But moving on, Gibbs Racing this week finally announced Martin Truex Jr. Again, something else we all knew was coming. Martin Truex Jr., Bass Pro Shops, Cole Pearn, they're all moving to the 19 team in 2019. And, of course, they're all out of a job because Furniture Row Racing, the team that just won the championship, the team that could win the championship again on Sunday, is shutting down, which is a whole other topic in and of itself.
Yeah,
we don't have time for it
That's
tonight,
what I was thinking, yeah.
So they're still with Toyota, and they're still with, obviously, a very good team. Kyle Busch is going for a championship this weekend.
Yes.
So they'll be contenders next year.
Absolutely.
But it is going to be weird not seeing Barney Visser's 78 out on track next year.
I know.
Yeah. It's amazing how far that team's come. I still remember the first race I ever watched was Talladega Fall 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know any of the driver. I take that back. I knew Dale Jr. because he had a cameo in Cars.
Okay.
And that race is famous for something else involving Jr., Jimmy Johnson, and Brian Vickers at the finish. We won't go into that right now. But I remember throughout the whole race, the guy in 42nd place was the exact same the whole time. And I was thinking to myself, who's this Kay Wallace guy in the 78 and why are they stuck back? Well, that Kay Wallace was Kenny Wallace. That team was Furniture Row Racing. They were a start and park team at that point. They had no sponsorship. Barney was putting Furniture Row on the cars, free advertising. But they slowly worked their way up. They got a win with Regan Smith in 2011. And, of course, when they got Martin Truex Jr., made the Final Four in 2015, won the championship last year, have a shot to win the championship again this year.
Yeah.
So it's unbelievable how far that team's come.
Seriously.
And it's something that I don't think we'll ever see again with this charter system and how much money it takes to fund these race cars.
No, agreed. And like you said, the first win, you said came in 2011?
Yes.
So just over the span of 7 years, obviously how much since 2006, but even thinking, kind of smaller picture, I guess, from 2011 to 2018, just the massive jumps that they've made in where they're placing and who they're signing.
Yeah, and there's a variety of reasons why the team's shutting down. Of course, there are reports that Gibbs was going to up the price of their technical alliance with the team, and 5 Hour Energy pulling their sponsorship didn't really leave an opportunity for them to make up that difference. So it was basically, if you're put in Barney's shoes, it's either go back to being an unaffiliated organization without a lot of sponsorship, put Furniture Row in the car, and go back to running 20th every week, or say, we had a lot of success, let's go out on a high and shut the team down, as unfortunate as that is.
Yeah. And when you look at it that way, I think that what they're doing is the right move. Go with a bang, not a whimper kind of ordeal.
It's still crazy, though. Can you imagine the NFL having an announcement? It's like, guys, the Patriots are shutting down, or the Eagles are shutting down. That's basically what's happening in NASCAR.
Yeah, and that's so odd. That's so being an outsider looking in on motorsports racing and stuff. That I can't comprehend that. It's bizarre.
Well, the rise of pay drivers too is another thing that speaks to the sponsorship issue. You know, like, Matt, I want to ask you: can you imagine? A lot of times we have these days teams coming out and saying, "Well, we hope to have so and so in the car next year, sponsorship pending." Can you imagine being here in Boston, hearing Robert Kraft come on the radio and saying, "Yeah, we hope to have Tom back throwing our footballs next year as long as he can finance half the team. But if he can't do that, we're going to have to replace him with somebody clearly not as good who can provide that financial." Like, does that sound like a legitimate sport?
No, I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's
a sad reality with how much the sport's struggling these days. You need those pay drivers to come in and bring the bills, even if talent-wise they're not there.
Yeah, that's a unfortunate. Yeah, unfortunate.
And obviously, not all pay drivers are bad drivers.
No.
Heck, Martin brings Bass Pro himself because he's an outdoors guy. It makes sense that he'd have a connection with them. That's why he's taking them over to Gibbs. But it's just the vast majority of pay drivers are subpar.
Yes. Yeah. No, and that takes away from the sport too. The whole thing's kind of a mess, and it's sad to see that. I'm new. I'm just getting involved in it, and now I'm thinking, oh my goodness, and the next 3 years, by the time we graduate, what's it gonna look like then? I hope it looks vastly different. I hope it looks vastly different in a positive manner. But I can't help from thinking that it may look vastly different in a negative
ISM
manner.
Raceway just had a major renovation, that nearly $180 million renovation of their track.
Wow.
Totally reconfigured it, a whole new section of the infield for the fans, and they had to sell out their races last week. So, looking at the TV ratings and everything, I'm not sure there is much room for it to get much lower. I feel like if there is a silver lining, the only way they can go from here is up.
Yes.
So, we'll see where the sport is in a few years, but
it'll be interesting to see what unfolds.
Yeah, and
over the next couple
still
seasons.
Unfortunate that this is Furniture Row's last race.
I know.
Coming up this weekend.
Yeah.
All right, so last little bit of news before we get into the Phoenix recap. I mentioned Sheldon Creed had a nice run for GMS last week, the ARCA champion. GMS just signed him to a full deal for 2019. So congrats to Sheldon Creed, well deserved. Look forward to seeing what he can do.
Absolutely.
I would assume it's only a 1 or 2 year deal because most deals for development drivers at that level are only for a certain period of time because you expect them, if they perform well, they move up. If they don't, they don't.
Exactly. So, okay.
Yeah. We'll see what Sheldon Creed can do. He's got a good opportunity here.
Absolutely. And I think he'll take advantage of it.
All right, well, speaking of a truck race, or speaking of a truck series, rather, the truck race at Phoenix was an interesting one. Resulted in Brett Moffitt coming in, taking the lead late as he's done all season, with all of his wins coming with a lead change at the end of the race. So he stole another win, locking his spot in the championship 4 up at Miami. Matt Crafton and Grant Enfinger are eliminated. So Moffitt's story is really inspiring because his team wasn't even sure they were going to be able to run the full schedule. If you remember, after his second win of the year, with Moffitt being the guy who won 2 of the first 9 races, he basically came out and said, yeah, we're not sure we have the funding to go to Chicago next week. And of course, he went out, he got a sponsorship deal for that race. He's been doing a great job of putting a bunch of small deals together and went out and won Chicago.
Yeah.
So this team that wasn't even sure they were going to be able to run the full schedule is now going to Miami with a shot at a championship.
That's pretty.
So how cool of a story is that?
That's typical, not typical, but that's a Cinderella story right there. That you love to see that. That's awesome to have that coming into the championship 4 here in the truck series.
Yeah, it's cool to see that single truck team competing with Kyle Busch Motorsports, GMS, Thor Sport, all those top teams in the truck series. So yeah, it is Moffitt, Haley, and Sauter, the 3 race winners from the round of 6. Noah Gragson got in on points. He was the runner-up at Phoenix. So, Matt, do you have any predictions for the truck championship? We'll go through each series and ask, who's your pick to win?
My pick from the truck series would be Haley.
Really?
I was tossing it up between Haley and Sauter.
So you like the GMS guys then?
I actually didn't know. I knew they were teammates. I didn't know they were together with GMS. So that's, going back to the whole Sheldon Creed ordeal. That's pretty cool. But I know Haley won 3 races this season, so not a ton. But 2 last lap wins in playoff races, the Canadian Tire Motorsport Park and Texas.
Yeah, I talked about that last week. Todd Gilliland was on the unfortunate end of both of those. It looked like he was coasting home to the win, and then something took him out, and Haley was right there to capitalize.
I know he's young. I know he's not, 19, doesn't have the experience. I got a kind of a gut feeling, I guess, that I think that Haley's going to be able to. He seems locked in. He's performing well during the playoffs, so he's carrying that over with him. So my prediction is Haley out of the truck series.
My heart says Moffitt. My head tells me Johnny Sauter, just solely because of the experience and his consistency all year. And this format's only been in a truck series for 3 years. Of course, Sauter won the championship in 2016. He was in the Final Four last year. He's in it again this year.
Yes.
So as long as he has a clean race, I don't see anything stopping Johnny Sauter from winning another championship.
No, I think you're right. Like you said, he's been here the last 3 years now, winning in 2016. That does go with the whole experience thing, and that's why I was tossing it up between Haley and Sauter. Is obviously Sauter is someone who knows how this works. He's someone that, it's just kind of, to him, I would imagine it's just like any other race. He doesn't feel the pressure of the fact that it is playoffs. Whether he wins or doesn't win, the fact that he's in the championship 4 is phenomenal. It says a lot about him as a racer. So I'm interested. I think that experience-wise, that's going to be key to how he's going to perform. Maybe I'm just a little hopeful with when it comes to Haley to see like a little bit of an upset, but either way.
Well, no matter how you feel about this format, I talked about that a little bit last week as well, but it does give any one of those 4 a shot. All they have to do is go out and finish ahead of the other 3.
That's it.
And usually that means going out and winning the race. So
that's very true.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with those 4 in the truck series.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so moving on to the Xfinity race. Christopher Bell had some rotten luck in the earlier 2 races with a couple of accidents and basically needed to go out and win, and that's exactly what he did. So he is in the Final Four along with Cole Custer, Tyler Reddick, and Daniel Hemrick. So, Matt, who's your Xfinity Series prediction?
Out of the Xfinity Series, I have Chris Bell. I think that he's been consistent all year long. He's on the younger end of the spectrum too, right?
He is.
Okay. I think
won a lot of races this year.
a ton of races.
One of which we were in attendance for.
Yes, and getting to see him race in person, you really can start to get the concept of how great of a racer that he really is. And I think that, again, similar to the mindset that Sauter's going into the Truck Series championship for with, I think it's just going to be another race for him. I don't think he's spooked. I don't think he's, rattled or anything. I think that he's going in there. He's got a good mindset. He's got a lot of confidence. Obviously, with the first 2 races, he had some crummy luck, but I think those are behind him. I think that's, with who he is as an athlete, I don't think that's going to hinder him or his performance this week.
Yeah, I'm also going with Christopher Bell. I wouldn't mind seeing Daniel Hemrick win it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the interesting thing about Hemrick is he has still never won a NASCAR race. Doesn't have a truck win. He's been knocking on the door all year in the Xfinity Series with his RCR team, but it's never quite broken through.
Wow.
So can you imagine scoring your first victory and having it come at Homestead, winning the championship?
That would be phenomenal. What a story that would be. We have the Moffitt story from earlier, having
a team that was not sure they were going to run the full year.
Wow.
And apparently, Daniel Hemrick is a backflip guy. If you remember Carl Edwards, that was his signature move after he won a race. He'd do a backflip off of his car. He's retired now, so we haven't seen any backflips recently, so I'm sure the fans would get a kick out of seeing Daniel Hemrick do a backflip at Homestead.
Absolutely. That'll be a way to get the crowd involved, get the crowd hyped up. That's unbelievable. Huh.
Yeah.
Wow, that changes my perspective a little bit on this, but I still think.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Bell is going to be unstoppable if he has a clean race. Of course, Bell was the truck champion last year, so he knows what this Final Four feels like. So I don't see anything stopping him.
Neither do I.
All right, so the Cup Series race. I actually want to start with something completely different. So Tanner Berryhill, who was making his debut for Obeka Racing, who themselves as a team just made their debut at Talladega a couple of weeks ago, he brought out a couple of late race cautions with some mishaps. Berryhill hasn't run a race in NASCAR since 2014 in the Xfinity Series. His one Cup attempt in 2015 was a DNQ. So, Matt, in your opinion, we always talk about, I'm always partial to the small teams and the underdogs. I want to see them have their shot, and I think the direction the sport's going kind of has shut them out a little bit. But I don't know how I feel about a small team, in particular hiring a driver who doesn't have a whole lot of experience, making his debut in the penultimate race of the season with so much on the line for all the other guys, and bringing out a caution that could potentially shift the entire order of the race.
It's for me, from my perspective, it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, with someone who doesn't have experience, this kind of removes a lot of that pressure in the fact that, they're gonna race, obviously, but I feel like there's a lot less pressure. During these races, it's a good way to get experience, but at the same time, like you said, having 2 late cautions there, now you're taking away from the racers who are competitive, who are trying to compete, who do have the pressure. So, for me, I don't know if I'm one way or the other. I would probably have to think about it a little more. I'm kind of weighing the options, and you have more knowledge on it than I do. So, what do you think?
I think it's a risk, and my problem isn't so much with the team; it's with the driver, and that's not to disrespect Berryhill at all. But when you talk about making your Cup debut in a race like that, with everything on the line, if you're a small team, you have the funding to go for it, great.
Yeah.
But I would say try to hire a driver, certainly with, if not a resume, at least experience.
Yes.
Who at least knows what these cars feel like and is more likely to keep things out of trouble.
That's a good point.
Well, the biggest other late race caution basically took out Denny Hamlin, Chase Elliott, and Kurt Busch. A lot of fans thinking Hamlin was at fault. Others thought it was just a racing incident. But that pretty much meant Harvick was safe to make the Final Four unless Eric Almirola won the race. So there was some talk about on the late race restart if Kyle Busch should actually let Almirola win the race, because based on how performance has been all year, you would think Harvick would probably be more of a championship favorite than Almirola.
Mm-hmm.
So do you let Almirola win and knock Harvick out so that you have less competition at Homestead, or you're Kyle Busch, you're a racer, you want the win, you don't care, you just go for it?
I think you got to just go for it.
I agree 100% with you.
Yeah.
And I think if that's the sentiment from 99.9% of the fans, the media, other drivers, everybody.
Absolutely. You don't want things to be staged. No offense to, WWE and such, but
Or Formula One.
or Formula One. But you're a fan of it's a sport, and you're a fan of the sport because you want to see competition. You want to see people who are willing to go whatever lengths they need to in order to win or to place well. It's a sport. It's competitive. So the idea of this, I guess, gentlemanly courtesy or whatever you want to call it, that's not real. That's an illusion. So I think that Kyle Busch, if he's gonna go for the win, he's gonna go for the win. It's weird that we're talking about this.
Well, we're talking about Kyle Busch too.
Exactly.
I mean, it's of all the drivers to talk about, I don't think Kyle Busch would pull over for anybody.
No.
Let alone somebody who's on a teammate who we'd basically be giving a ticket to the championship for. So.
Exactly. So no, I agree with what Busch did there.
So he did go on to win the race. So it is him, Harvick, and Truex, who were all in the championship for last year. They're all back, and it's not Brad Keselowski, it's his teammate Joey Logano, who missed the playoffs entirely last year, and because of that bump and run move on Truex in Martinsville, he has a shot at his first championship.
Yeah, I think as far as my prediction going into this, I'm gonna say I think Kyle Busch is gonna win. He's gonna emerge the victor. I'm gonna say, as far as those top four go, I'll say it'll go Busch, Truex, Logano, Harvick. That's my. I know that's a little more in depth.
I would switch Harvick and Truex.
Okay.
And the reason is Kyle Busch, every year that he's made the Final Four with Kevin Harvick, he's always finished ahead of him.
Mm-hmm.
So Harvick won the title in 2014. Busch wasn't in the Final Four that year. Busch won it in 15. Harvick finished second, and Harvick missed it in 16. Busch made it in 17, finished runner-up to Truex, and Harvick was behind them even. So when it's Busch and Harvick in the championship four, they're always up front, but Busch has gotten the better edge both times.
Yes.
So I'm going with Busch. I think Harvick will bounce back from this penalty, even though he'll have Tony Gibson calling the shots instead of Rodney Childers this week.
Yeah.
Although we did just get confirmation today that if the 4-car wins the championship, they'll bring Childers out of his timeout or whatever. I don't know what they'll have him doing. He won't be on the pit box, obviously, but he will be allowed to go on stage and celebrate with the team, which I think is the right move.
I think so too. I think
he's been a part of a team the majority of the season.
Yeah,
should let him
and
be a part of a celebration.
Yeah, and with what happened, it's at an unfortunate time. So I agree. I think that he should be able to go out there and celebrate with the rest of the team.
Yep. And then I have Logano in third, and it would be great to see Furniture Row go out with a championship, but I just think if you look at their performance ever since they announced the shutdown, having that, gloomy cloud over their heads, as unfortunate as it is, they haven't won in a mile and a half since Kentucky over the summer.
Wow.
In fact, they might not have won period since then. Of course, they looked like they were going to win at Martinsville, and then that last lap happened, but
it did.
I just don't see them finding the speed this weekend. Again, my heart says Truex because of what a great story it would be, but I've got to go with Kyle Busch.
Yeah. I feel the same. My heart does say Truex as well, but kind of looking at it statistically, thinking about it logically, I think Kyle Busch has the upper hand and the best opportunity to come away with the win.
All right, so let's move on to the other racing action this past weekend. It was the Brazilian Grand Prix for Formula One, and Lewis Hamilton, shocker, comes away with another victory, and it's his 50th win in the V6 Turbo Hybrid era, so since 2014. So he has now won 50 of the 99 races in that time period.
I don't know.
Absolute dominance.
Yeah. Yeah, which is awesome. But at the same time, and it's something that we've been talking about since we started the show. That's 50 out of 99. That's more than half the races. So his win percentage is over 500, which I think.
What do you think of how many of those races were won by Nico Rosberg from 2014 to 2016 when Mercedes were truly dominant? I think clearly they still have the upper edge right now, but Ferrari and Red Bull have definitely closed the gap.
Yes.
If you remember back in 2016, there were 21 races on the schedule. Mercedes won 19 of them. The only two they didn't win, the first one was in Spain when they were running 1-2 on the opening lap and Rosberg and Hamilton were going for it, crashed into each other. That was that. And the second one, Rosberg got caught up in some action on the opening lap with Sebastian Vettel. That set him back. He ended up recovering to finish third. But Lewis Hamilton was coasting to victory. Looked like nothing was going to stop him. Then the engine blew up. So Mercedes easily could have had... Although I guess if you're going to do that, you have to give Monaco to Daniel Ricciardo because when he came into the pits, Red Bull didn't have his tires ready, and he came out... That delayed his pit stop, obviously. He came out just behind Lewis. Lewis ended up winning that race. But I think Ricciardo... with the Red Bull aerodynamics, had the better car that day.
Absolutely.
But Mercedes easily could have had a perfect year that season had everything gone their way.
That's true. That's true.
Their dominance has been absolutely nothing short of incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Yeah. And Lewis is one of those guys, too, where just, you can love him, you can hate him, but no matter how you feel about him, you have to respect the man for what he's done.
Absolutely.
And all the accomplishments he has.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So he won this race, but actually you can argue that he shouldn't have won this race. It should have been Max Verstappen. And Max was leading the race and about to put Esteban Ocon's Force India a lap down. Well, as they were going through the corner, Ocon fought back. They touched, sent both of them spinning. And Verstappen recovered to finish second behind Hamilton, but there was a lot of controversy. Max obviously wasn't too happy. It actually got a little physical in the paddock afterwards. So, Matt, I want to ask you, a driver's allowed to unlap himself, but with the gap with Red Bull and the top three being as big as it is to the midfield, do you think Ocon just should have taken a step back, or should Verstappen have left more room? What do you think should have happened here?
I think it's fine. Again, I don't really have any quorums with what happened. It's racing. Yes, you have the ability to unlap yourself. I don't think that anyone should have given more space. That's just, especially when it comes to Esteban Ocon and Max Verstappen, that's not going to happen. Like, logically, the way those guys are, that's not what's going to occur.
Yeah. And what we should note, too, that the Force India has a Mercedes power unit, which is faster in a straight line than Red Bull's Renault power unit.
Yes.
So Ocon actually did have an advantage down the straight. It's just obviously when you take a whole lap, the Red Bull's much stronger. But with Ocon having that run, there's nothing saying he can't unlap himself if he has the opportunity to.
Exactly. And pulled up this news article coming out of Australia, and it's titled "Mad Max Verstappen." I thought that was kind of funny. And it said that Verstappen and Ocon, after their collision, that wasn't what was going to cause any of the issues. They said what had happened was Ocon had given a wry smile and claimed that he was faster than Verstappen, and that's what kind of sparked the whole controversy. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I think that's a really interesting kind of behind-the-scenes look. Again, if that's what truly occurred, the fact that it wasn't the collision that initiated the conflict between the two, but rather Ocon kind of touting when what he said clearly isn't true.
Yeah. Well, the stewards did deem Ocon to be at fault, and they gave him a 10-second stop-go penalty, which is basically the most severe in-race penalty there is aside from disqualification. But I personally think that was a little harsh. You could make the argument Verstappen definitely could have left more room. Mm-hmm. And that was the argument that Lewis Hamilton made, and Ocon's almost like a teammate to Hamilton in some ways because he is a Mercedes junior driver. Ocon is. So you can't blame Lewis for coming out and defending Esteban. But Lewis basically told Max as they were cooling down, you've got a lot more to lose than he does. He's fighting for, pride and crumbs at the bottom of the midfield. Whereas you're fighting for a win. So maybe you have to be smarter and give him a little bit more room in that situation. Minimize your risks.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. That's a very good point.
All right, so I think that's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of the Photo Finish. And next week, we'll recap Homestead, Miami, and the Championship 4 and break everything down for you. That race will be this Sunday on NBC, and if you want an alternative, NBCSN is actually going to do a Hot Pass broadcast that they've been doing each of the last 3 years, ever since they regained the television rights. And that'll focus on radio and have the cameras constantly on all 4 championship contenders. So Lee Diffie, who's my favorite play-by-play guy in all of sports, I think he does a fantastic job every time he's on the call. We'll be doing that alongside Dale Jarrett.
Wow.
So you have 2 options. NBCSN is going to simulcast with NBC this weekend for the race.
That's phenomenal. Wow, I didn't know that. Okay. So yeah, you do have 2 options. As far as, and I know we're coming down the stretch here, but as far as how the advertisements are going to be run, is there NBC or NBCSN, is one of them going to have more coverage? Is it going to be kind of the same thing?
They'll both go to commercials probably at the same time.
Okay.
But it's just when you're watching the Hot Pass, you know what you're going to get. It's going to be radio and everything on the main championship 4. So if Kyle Busch is your favorite driver, I'd recommend watching Hot Pass if you can, because you're always going to have an eye on him and see what he's doing, whereas NBC has 39. I think the entry list is a little short this week, but they've got a whole field to cover. So,
yes.
Just like any other race. But if you want Hot Pass to see where your driver's running, if your driver's in the championship fight, that's definitely the way to go, I think. All right, well, thank you guys for listening. For Matt Cole, I'm Ben Schneider, and we'll see you next week to break down Homestead.